Albrecht on this Tuesday edition. It is pre-recorded. Katherine Albrecht, who I believe, if I recollect, I first learned about on an Alex Jones documentary, Loose Change, or one of his documentaries, and you were talking about the RFID chips. And they were putting them on packages, like without your knowledge, so that they know what you purchase. And then lastly, I saw you at the Liberty Forum this past February up in New Hampshire, and you were talking about they're putting them on children, they want them in the schools, and this one girl who refused, and she was taking them to court because she refused to walk around with this, I forget exactly what it was. It was some kind of an electronic monitor device. And so now, recently, you've been talking about how they want this woman that has chips that they want you to swallow them.
Yeah, well, Katherine, first of all, it's great to be your guest on Organic Radio News here, and I've got a long history of working on this topic of RFID. I've been a privacy advocate since 1999, and in 2003, I switched my focus from consumer privacy in the retail space to really looking closely at RFID tags and trying to really see the kind of impact that this technology would have. And they, as you pointed out, originally were putting these on consumer products. They wanted it to replace the barcode. And what an RFID tag is: radio frequency identification. It's tiny microchips hooked up to miniature antennas that can transmit information wirelessly using electromagnetic radiation or radio waves. So they can pass information through your purse or your pocket, through your shopping bag, or even through walls. And retailers and consumer manufacturers like Walmart and Procter & Gamble were actually using them to spy on customers in a way that was pretty disturbing. So we fought back against that. Then there was the Verichip Corporation, which I think its other name was Digital Angel. It had a bunch of different names, but people probably know it as the Verichip. We're promoting this as something you could inject into a person, just like in a dog or a cat. It's the same technology.
Nice.
That would enable that person to be scanned just like a barcoded package of meat. It basically transmits a unique ID number. The ones that go into flesh only have about a 6-inch read range, though, so they're terrifying, they're horrible, and they reduce you to a number, but they are not trackable by satellite, at least not yet. And then in this last just couple of months, a woman named Regina Dugan, who is the former head of DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Administration, which is this very creepy research arm of the U.S. military that works on things like, surveillance spiders and dragonflies with cameras on board and just very disturbing stuff. They, the head of that administration, Regina Dugan, left DARPA and took a job with Google as the head of Motorola. And of course, Motorola is Google's attempt to get every person to have a Google device in their hands, because if you have an Android operating system Motorola phone in your hands, then you're basically carrying Google with you everywhere you go. And at a recent conference, Regina Dugan actually sat up on a stage and she showed us two very disturbing things. One was an RFID tattoo on her arm.
Oh, boy.
And it sounds a little creepier than it was. It was actually a sticker, but it shows you the direction that they want to go. This was a sticker that contained all the circuitry and the microchip to enable a person to have this RFID implant on the top of their skin instead of inside of them. And then she said something even weirder. She held out a handful of pills, and she said, well, what you could do is you could take vitamin authentication and actually swallow the RFID pill into your body. And the way it would work, it's an RFID microchip with its antenna. It is encapsulated so that you swallow it, and then the coating dissolves away. And when the stomach acid in your digestive tract makes contact with, the device, it powers it. I don't know if you've ever done in school, like where you take a lemon and you stick 2 wires into it and you can power, a little light bulb or something. So you can actually power things using that acidic reaction. And so the idea is now you've got this in your stomach, and it's powered by this chemical reaction with the juices, the digestive juices.
Wow.
And as it makes its way through your body, here's the part that's really disturbing, it actually turns your body into an antenna. So now your very flesh is transmitting your unique ID number. It's transmitting through every inch of surface area of your body. And so what Regina Dugan says is, you swallow this and your arms become antennas, and your hands become alligator clips, and everything you touch, like when you go to log on to your Motorola phone, for example, when you touch your phone, you're transmitting that unique ID number from the microchip in your stomach, and you're transmitting it all through your body and onto your phone. And that would be, instead of a password, it would actually be your body serves as your password or your authentication. And that's why she called it vitamin authentication.
Why and like how are they selling this to the public? I mean, of course it's under this guise of terrorism in some way.
Well, it's interesting. I don't think that they've yet gone public with this. You've got to kind of understand what DARPA is. DARPA is really a future-looking research arm of the military, and so a lot of the things that they do involve, cloning and finding ways to help soldiers not have to sleep for weeks on end, or finding ways to create remote control rats, that you actually have real live rats and you can take a joystick and make them move left or right. So DARPA really is, you could call them on the very cutting edge, or you could call them on the very creepy edge, but a lot of what they do is not really intended for the general public. And I think in this case, obviously, Google and Motorola create products intended for the general public. And so a remote-controlled rat would be a remote control rat. Well, that would not be something you'd probably want to buy, but vitamin authentication might be something that you would. So they haven't come out with it yet. They have received FDA approval on the device. They've partnered with the company that makes them, which has received approval to begin selling it.
And how do they get
now it's just a question of whether they can get people to be interested in buying it.
Right, and right. So that how would they sell that to the public? How would they get people? I mean, I know that. I hate to sound so cynical, but it's probably not that hard to get people to want this stuff if they just.
Well, that's the depressing part.
Yeah.
She actually said, as far as the tattoo goes, that it's difficult to get young people, and I guess by that she meant people in their teens, 20s, maybe early 30s. It's difficult to get young people to wear a watch. And, originally that was their plan, was to put the tracking technology into a wristwatch. She said, but now with this RFID tattoo, that you could get people to, young people to, flock to this product and totally love it, if for no other reason than to upset, she used the word pee off, I won't use the word, but their parents. So she was basically saying that the way to get people on board is to paint this tracking technology, this surveillance enslavement technology, basically, as a cool way to rebel against your parents.
And then obviously then you don't need parental consent in order to, for them to have this.
Right, and actually that's an interesting point you raised, Katherine, because I authored legislation that was introduced in a number of states. You can actually find it at antichips.com, called the Bodily Integrity Act. And what that legislation is, it's a single-sided, one-sheet piece of paper. It's very straightforward. It's written in plain English, and it protects people against having microchips required for anything implanted in your body, required for employment or implanted in, people for whatever reason. It also forbids anyone under 18 from ever receiving one. And that even with parental permission, it's not appropriate. We don't allow, this is a dangerous technology, first of all. We don't allow, children to smoke. We don't allow children to enlist or enroll in the military. Our society has some pretty tight restrictions on alcohol, all of which are designed to protect young people from poor decisions that they might make before they reach full maturity. And really the whole concept of, saying that you cannot implant a microchip into yourself until you're 18, I think makes sense.
And so with these, the tattoos or these remote controlled rats, are they using that technology like in the military on soldiers or anything like that? I mean,
it's hard to know. I'm not aware of any direct programs that are doing that, so it's difficult to say. We've certainly heard a lot of rumors about soldiers being implanted with microchips, but I've never actually seen any hard evidence that I found convincing enough to believe. So I don't think it's coming yet. I think that now that she's left DARPA and left the U.S. military and is now working for the private sector, working for Google as the head of Motorola, I think that now they're going to be looking at consumer-facing products. And so her challenge is going to be how to take this very, cutting edge and many would say extremely disturbing technology and find a market for it or convince the general public that this is something that would be useful or valuable to them. And, that sounds like a big stretch. How would you get somebody to be willing to swallow, basically a device that turns you into a walking antenna beaming out a number? That sounds pretty 1984 or, pretty surveillance heavy. And especially knowing what we know about the NSA now, I can't imagine that anybody would knowingly want to do that. On the other hand, if they can find the killer app, the thing that just makes everybody really want it,
right,
then, 10 years ago, who would have thought that, 80-90% of Americans would be walking around with a portable GPS tracking device in their hands all day long. And yet we do that because it's the cell phone. And because of all the cool things that they've packed into it and the cool things that we can do with it, not only do we accept being tracked all the time with this handheld tracking device, which is really just a portable jailer. Not only do we accept it, but we pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars for the privilege, and we pay a monthly fee to do it.
Isn't that crazy?
So it's pretty clever how they can, take something that normally they couldn't pay you enough money to agree to and turn the tables and get you to pay them to have the, quote, privilege of doing it.
And even if, I'm sure they would find a way to create a situation that would make people want it. I mean, even if they had to do that, even if they had to, orchestrate some event or, whatever, it was in order to get people to want this. Yeah,
I think they found over time, though, that it's much more effective to have a carrot than a stick. You can provide a stick in the form of, some horrible disaster that happens, or you can take advantage, as members of our government have famously said, never let a good disaster go to waste.
Right.
You can take advantage of natural disasters. You can take advantage of wars and dark things and difficult things that happen in people's lives to scare them into compliance, like they've done in the airports with the naked icing machines.
Right.
Millions of people have gone through and allowed the government to actually see them naked. Who would have thought we would ever consent to that?
Right.
So that's the stick method, which is really frightening people of some external boogeyman to such an extent that they comply to your surveillance tactics. And then there's the carrot method, which is more the smartphone method, which is where they instead entice you with something cool and fun. And I would say that's not only the smartphone method, it's also the Facebook method, where, here's this wonderful place where I have, huge jolts of adrenaline and endorphins, of actual addictive chemicals flowing through my brain. And it's people can't wait to get onto Facebook to reveal more personal information about themselves. So a lot of that is psychology. People don't realize that checking your email or checking your Facebook or, reviewing your online status on all of these various services is almost as addictive as heroin. When they actually look at what gamblers who are addicted to gambling and they go to Vegas and they just gamble away everything they have and they can't stop even though they know it's harming them. they can look at their brains and see that the pleasure center and the addiction centers in their brains are going crazy as they do their gambling. Well, they've also found that internet users, and not just heavy ones, but pretty much all of us, have a similar response inside of our brains when we interact with these technologies. And so when that's happening, even, if we liken it to Vegas, when you're in Vegas and you're playing the slots and you're watching your rent money go up in smoke, there's a part of you that goes, that's really terrible. I'm harming myself. And yet the brain is so entranced and addicted to the process that you can't stop, even though you see what it's doing to you.
Yeah, it's funny.
And I think society now is in that position with these technologies. We're so entranced that even though we see that our privacy and our autonomy and even our futures are going up in smoke, we can't stop ourselves.
I mean, isn't it funny? Well, not funny, but that, so then our government is not our government. I mean, it's not there, for the people, obviously not like it's supposed to be. And then, so at the same time, while we are being surveilled and we are being followed and monitored all the time, people can still have this reluctance to want to believe that their government would ever, do anything that's not in their best interest, or would ever do anything to harm them, or, I mean, even when the evidence is pretty clear that it in fact would and is,
Yeah, I think there's a lot of psychological elements to that, and I actually have a doctorate from Harvard University in human development and psychology, so I've spent a lot of time trying to understand how it is that people think about these things and how they navigate them, and why we find ourselves in these relationships with power. And for one thing, when you hear about remote-controlled spiders from DARPA, you kind of cross yourself and hope that you never encounter one, and that's about it. When you hear about these things happening with corporations, then I think there's a tendency to want to say, oh yeah, but Facebook would never hurt me. Facebook is my friend. I love Facebook. I just see that logo and I get warm, addictive endorphin fuzzies in my brain. They would never hurt me. Yeah. Or Google. It's the beautiful colors and the happy logo and the funny name, and they'd never do anything to harm me. And so we're really turning over our data not to the government, but we're turning over our data to these companies.
Right.
That feels like a less threatening trade-off for us to be making, I think, for most people, because, Google doesn't have tanks and guns, and Facebook doesn't have soldiers in uniform. So we kind of think, well, how bad can it really be? These are just companies. The worst they could do is, I don't know, sell my data to some marketers, but a lot of people don't care about that.
So would you say that
where this becomes...
Would you say that the government has been taken over by the corporations, and that we really don't have a government?
No, I don't think that's the case. I think it's almost the other way around, where the data that's being collected by the corporations is then, once the corporations have done the dirty work of convincing you to turn over all of your personal information, then the government says, we want a piece of that pie, so let us in. And that's really what you're seeing through the NSA. And, a lot of us predicted this 10 years ago, when, really saying, if we provide all of our personal information into these private sector databases, that information is going to hang like low-hanging fruit that will be almost irresistible to government to swoop in and get a hold of. And so I think that, we saw it coming. But it's not so much that you're giving information to the government than it is that you're voluntarily surrendering information to the 9 big prison companies. Microsoft with Bing and Outlook and all of its online products that millions of people, most of the country uses something or other by Microsoft at some point. And then you've got Yahoo, which millions of people use, AOL, Skype.
And so what is their end goal? What is the ultimate reason for doing all of this?
Well, I think there's really two pieces. The companies just want to make money. And I always say that, when people ask me, who would spy on your RFID tag? I say there are 3 groups of people who would do that. They're marketers who simply want to know more about you so that they can extract more money from your pocket voluntarily. They're not holding you up at gunpoint. But that's really what they want. They want your money. And so marketers are the first, I think, to come into these surveillance technologies. Then you've got the people who really do want to hold you up at gunpoint, who are the hackers and criminals, and they certainly gravitate to this kind of information. And then finally, you've got the government, which wants this information to maintain the status quo. And governments throughout all of history and across all of the globe, their goal is always to maintain the status quo and further their own ends. Because the best definition of government I've ever come up with is a group of people who sought power over others and found a way to get it. That's really what they are. They're not they're not parents. They're not endowed by God with any kind of special desire to serve humanity for the most part. They're people who truly wake up in the morning and want to control other people. And, I have to say, of all the people who should not be controlling other people, it's probably the people who most desire that and who built their whole lives after being able to do it. So we've always had, throughout all of history, these governments, people at the, quote, top who want to advance themselves. They want to advance their power. They want to advance their income.
And it's
they
such
want to advance their influence.
Yeah.
And this enables them to do it.
And it's such a, I call it like carbon monoxide. I think of carbon monoxide that's, odorless and colorless. And it just is sort of, seeping its way into every part of your life or your house or whatever, and you just, you don't necessarily, notice it, you can't smell it, but yet it's overtaking you. I was a psych major. I've been studying about, especially, just dysfunctional, abusive, unhealthy relationships, my entire life, and a lot of health and fitness things. I've always been studying alternative healing kind of thing. And, like pretty early on, I got into this stuff, meditation and things like that, pretty much like decades ago. And I always kind of felt like I was moving in a bit of the opposite direction as other people, but I never really realized that it was to the extent that it was, today. Like, I never thought, I thought people, kind of knew things. Like, I thought that they knew, kind of better than me, and I was just like learning this stuff.
Right. The time that we keep thinking, those of us who have woken up, who are awake, we keep thinking if only everybody just knew, then we could solve this problem. And the reality is, first of all, you don't need everybody to know to solve anything. Margaret Mead had a wonderful quote that it does not take a majority, to solve, to change the world. All it takes is a committed minority, and that's the only thing that ever has changed the world. So you don't need everybody on board, but let's say we did have everybody on board. The example that I always bring up is all of the countries that were under the oppression of the Soviet Union through the dark ages of the Cold War. During that time, people in Romania and Poland and Lithuania and other countries, 100% of them knew that their government was corrupt.
Right.
They all knew. There was no waking up that had to happen, and yet they were even more oppressed than we are. So merely waking up is not the solution. Going out and trying to wake up your neighbors is not the answer to the problem. The answer to the problem is mobilizing the people who have already woken up, and then coming up with constructive solutions to try to do something about this.
And a lot of times,
so I think that there's a place for all of us. There's certainly a place for the educators and the megaphones to go out and tell people, but I think there's an even bigger place for people who are willing to just roll up their sleeves and get to work, even if their neighbors and coworkers and family members have no idea why they're doing it.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes trying to wake people up actually creates the opposite effect. If you push them, like a muscle, sometimes if you push them a little bit too much too soon, like they're just gonna kind of get tight and then fight you back. I mean, it's all about.
That's a beautiful analogy. I love that. I'm going to use that if I may.
Oh, sure. No, I'm just, I always went in the direction of like health. Like, I mean, what's real? I mean, to me, money was never real. So I never really went in that direction because, I felt that you have to develop your skills. You have to cultivate yourself first. And then, money will come. Like, it should come secondary to going after what you believe in first, so it was kind of this natural, you have to have that first. I mean, if you're kind of underdeveloped and your skills and talents are underdeveloped and you're going after money, you have no leverage with money if you are underdeveloped yourself and your talents and your knowledge is underdeveloped. Then, right, it's like money is going to have this leverage and you're going to be in this never-ending treadmill. I had that sense like so early that the direct, I always use fitness metaphors. I just, can't help it because, so you want to, right, like build your muscle first, and that only comes from nature. And so when you build that first, then muscle burns fat. But if you're chasing after, right, the fake stuff, the man-made stuff, it's like being fat. And then it's so much harder to burn fat when you don't have the muscle first. And that's like the trap that I feel like a lot of people are caught in. Like they have so much kind of, mental cellulite because they haven't, they themselves, right, they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the, and the know-how. And then, once you get, you gain too much weight, it's much harder to lose it later on.
I those are all really, I think, accurate and interesting analogies because, you get to the point where you are so enmeshed in the system that even if you begin to recognize that maybe the system isn't so great, you can't get out of it. I mean, there are so many people who work for these companies whose jobs consist of surveilling other people, or marketers whose whole worldview is about how can I get more data on them without them knowing, and how can I get them to contribute more and trick them, into telling me more, because that's the way their whole business is run. And one of the prayers that I often pray is, Lord, please help the people who are on the wrong road and contributing to these things. Open a window for them, open a door for them, change their circumstances and give them an alternative so that they don't have to do this terrible stuff to other people. And that's a big part of it too. When you see people resisting you, it's probably because they have something at stake. Whether it's that, what's at stake is financial, maybe what's at stake is emotional, maybe what's at stake is their sense of peace. Yeah. That once you wake up, I mean, Solomon in the Bible actually said, with great wisdom and with great knowledge comes great suffering. And it's true. Right. Wasn't it easier when you were just a kid and you didn't know any of this? You just kind of believed that the president was second in line to God and would only.
Sorry, next one.
It was an easier world to live in, but it was also a less mature world, and it was an inaccurate worldview. And so as we go older, and again, I'm going to come back to the Bible. The Bible says when I was a child, I acted and thought like a child, but now that I'm an adult, I'm putting away childish things. And I think so many Americans don't want to do that. They don't want to wake up and grow up and, get to the next step of their own development, to look around and realize that so much of what they've been told and fed and, convinced of through the media, through just society, is not true. It's not accurate. So then that's a huge challenge. You have to first of all face the crumbling of all your beliefs, which nobody wants to do. And then second of all, you have to develop a new worldview, and you have to really step up to the plate and man up, or woman up as the case may be, and really respond to that challenge. And many people simply don't want to grow up. We want to be Peter Pan and never know.
Would you say, because I really liked and agreed in Aaron Russo's Freedom to Fascism, where they talk about it's deliberate manipulation to want to break the family system down. And I kind of, agreed with that, and that part of the problem, or a great deal of the problem, is the breakdown of the family, and that there are no parents really. And because what you're describing, what I'm hearing you say, to me, it just sounds like, right, like what I've heard, and they even talked about it in the State of Mind documentary that just recently came out, the psychology of mind control, about, keeping people in that perpetual state of, just childlikeness or adolescence.
It's infantilization, and the best way to understand it is really to think about domesticated animals.
Right.
The difference between a cow and a deer is that the cow has been domesticated over thousands of years to become extraordinarily docile and stupid. And its only purpose is, truly to provide humans with ways of exploiting it through taking its milk and its meat. And I eat meat. I'm not necessarily knocking that, but I am going to say that domestication is all about that. And when you think about, for example, a cat or a dog, the difference between your dog and a wild wolf is that your dog is stuck in a place of perpetual puppyhood.
Right.
See, when dogs are puppies, they're puppies. They're very much like our dogs. They're docile, they're obedient, they want to do what you want them to do, they want to please you, and they look to you to provide them with food. Puppies look to their parents. Hey mama, go kill something and feed me, I'm hungry. Right. So when we domesticate animals, what we do is we make them very docile. The last thing we ever want to do is have them, bite or fight back. And we also make them dependent upon us. We make them like children. So your cat looks to you for food, your dog looks to you for food. That's baby behavior in the animal world. That's not adult behavior. No adult wolf or tiger is going to look to anyone else to provide it with food or nourishment or shelter or anything else. And so the fact that we have this history with animals of understanding how to domesticate and infantilize animals truly, I believe, is a model for the domestication and infantilization of human population.
Right.
So if you can get people to become dependent, get them to be kind of slow and stupid, and then get them to be dependent upon you for their very survival. Mother, may I please fly on the airplane today? Mother, may I please get a job? That's coming. Right. With this new Immigration Reform Act, one of the pieces of that is you're going to have to beg to the government every time you want to get a job. You're going to have to say, hey, here's my job, and could I please, Mother, may I get this job? Would you give me permission to support my family? And the government has the power to say no. So, and this is not just immigrants. This is not just going to be about immigrants. This is ultimately going to be about each one of us. If they don't like us, they can say, no, I'm sorry, you didn't pay the right tax, or you didn't get the right permit to put the deck on the back of your house, or you didn't get the right vaccines for your kids, or you're not eating the right food and paying the right insurance premiums. And then you'll find that you're not able to do anything. And so it's really like your dog. Your dog says, Mommy, can I go outside? I have to pee. What do they do for 14,000 hours with young humans? That for 14,000 hours, they put us in a locked institution called a government school, and then they train us to ask permission to pee.
Yeah, that you just reminded me of Shawshank Redemption. When Red finally gets out, and he's working in the supermarket, and he's always asking the boss, like, restroom break, boss. The guy's like, you don't have to ask me every time you have to go to the bathroom. Just
That's
go.
Right.
And
but I'll tell you that's exactly what happens to us, because 14,000 hours of your bottom in a seat being acculturated to all of this by a government institution that wants you to be the kind of citizen that they want to have has a profound effect. I dropped out of high school after ninth grade. And I hated high school. I hated being told what to do. I hated having to ask permission to go pee. So I actually wound up moving to Mexico and being a co-host on a TV station, living a whole other life instead, and then starting college when I was 15.
Wow.
So, to me, that whole mother, may I please, is crazy to me. I've never worked a corporate job. I've always found a way to not have to do that. And I think that's part of it too. I think part of it is just temperament. Some of us are really wired to chafe under that yoke, to feel uncomfortable with that kind of institutional control imposed on us. Right. And other people, I think, truly seek it out. I mean, if they don't have it, they look for it, try to find it. Who's going to tell me what to do next? Let me join a cult. Let me join whatever, because they seek that, and the government takes advantage of the fact that most human beings are truly, we're social creatures, and we follow one another, and that's pretty natural. I think they take advantage of that.
Yeah, I think, maybe that's what happened to me, because I kind of had to grow up pretty early. I had divorce in my family fairly early. I was on my own quite early, and I got used to, just, really being almost like the parent and raising myself quite early. That, I mean, it did sort of, and I did a really good job. I mean, I kind of did know a lot. I mean, I could feel that I was being, conditioned by the system and made to be dependent, and not being raised to be independent. Not being raised to fly out of the nest, instead the opposite.
Yes.
And so,
that's a good way of putting it.
And the thing wasn't, it wasn't an intellectual conscious thing that I just decided one day. It came from my gut. It was just an automatic. I think about someone not paying attention and stepping off of a sidewalk and twisting their ankle. I mean, your ankle isn't making some conscious decision to swell and get black and blue. It's just something that automatically happens, and that's where it came from for me. It's it's an automatic thing that comes from nature, and I've always been, for so long, trying to get people to come back to your instincts. I try to get people, I talk about meditation a lot. That's how I ended up getting this radio show, because, it ended up coming from Facebook. I mean, I was doing the radio show with Danny Schechter. I was actually trying to get you on Danny Schechter's radio show when I was doing that with him. And I would be posting all of these things about, just health and try, empowerment and listening to your instincts, coming back to nature, because, right, the system wants to separate you from nature more and more and more and more. There's a line from the movie Jaws that I think is a really good line that I say every so often. And, it's when Roy Scheider's character says to the other two guys while they're on the boat, and he says, why don't we start leading the shark back to shore instead of him leading us out to sea? To me, in that movie, that's the moment of, the light bulb moment when he realizes that, hello, the shark is leading us out into his territory. We should be leading him the other way. And so
that's a great point.
Yeah, so getting more and more separated from our nature. And people don't realize that, and I realized that just early, and fitness was one of the ways that really helped me a lot. Exercise. People don't spend enough time in their bodies. They're being separated. Everything is being made to be easier and more convenient. And the more you get separated from your body, I mean, that's death right there. I mean, that literally is death. When you are no longer in your own body, that is death. You want to, and a certain amount of challenge. People turn away from challenge. They turn away from discomfort. And again, exercise is so important, because you're going the other way. You're going into the discomfort to a reasonable point. You want to go into the discomfort. You want to go into the truth. You want to face the fact that you're not in shape. You want to face the fact that you don't know things. You want to go the other way and go into some pain, some discomfort, and take your breath with you when you go. Just if you can move into the discomfort and take a deep breath at the same time, then at least, you know that you're not getting overwhelmed. like yoga and meditation is all about doing things with your breath. As long as you can, go into your pose and take a deep breath at the same time, you haven't lost yourself. You're doing it not at the expense of yourself, but with, acquiring more of yourself rather than doing it at the expense of yourself. So it's all about doing things with, and that to me is key. If people can just kind of understand, it's not really that complicated, but it just takes practice. It just takes mindfulness. If you get so distracted, right? If the system has you so wrapped up in just, going to work and being a consumer, and then when people have children, sometimes it can be even more of a distraction, and then you lose, it's like you're just losing more and more and more of yourself, which is not good.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting because there's a kind of a dichotomy there, because what the marketers and the manipulators would tell you is it's all about you. Focus on yourself. Hey, you deserve it. Buy a Big Mac. You deserve a break today. It's all this messaging that's all about you, and that gets back to destroying the family. Because if you focus on your needs and yourself, which we're trained to do, really, by it seems paradoxical, but the more you focus on yourself, the less mature you are. Right. And the more you focus on yourself, the more easily manipulated you are, because you're just a whiny little brat who can't handle anything difficult, and because everything's about you. And so I think in that sense too, all of these infantilizing kinds of systems are really designed to keep us navel gazing and focused on our own selves and our own needs and our own whatever. And true maturity is really making sure that you're operating from a position of strength, as you're describing, and then figuring out how to step out and save others. I mean, when I say save others, I don't mean go out and try to convince every single person you know about the truth, because you won't ever be able to do that necessarily. But figure out, how do I just make this world a better place so that others can benefit, and how can my daily actions benefit those around me? And those are challenges. We're never trained to think like that, are we? I mean, they don't teach you that in school. They don't teach you how to wake up in the morning and think, okay, how can I make the world a better place and benefit those around me? I mean, you're not going to get that message. You're going to get, how can I spend more money and get more plastic surgery and become more beautiful and more important and more powerful and have more friends and more money and, more sex appeal. But it's all about you. And so I think what you're talking about is a really healthy body attitude, which says, how do I get in my body to develop the strength to operate from a position of health and strength and wholeness, where I'm centered and grounded and not just blown every way the wind goes, so that now I'm strong and healthy in a position to reach out and do the things that really matter.
And relationships are, survival. I mean, we need to have like healthy interactions with other people if we're to survive. So if we're thinking of ourselves, we're actually really killing ourselves if we're that self-absorbed. I mean, it's got to be, you got to have an exchange with other people, in a healthy exchange with other people, in order to sustain yourself. I mean, like the family system to me is key. If you don't have a family and healthy interactions, healthy exchanges with like a community even, maybe it doesn't have to even be like a traditional family, but just a community.
You need people. You need people. And Katherine, one of the things that has me so concerned is the skyrocketing rate of mental illness and suicide in our society.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that we're seeing so many suicides because people are isolated. The number one thing that contributes to suicide is the sense of being alone. I was recently reading a New York Times write-up on suicide and the new statistics, and there was a line there that really struck me. It was a suicide note from a man who had jumped off, I think it was the Brooklyn Bridge. He jumped off one of the bridges in New York and killed himself. But in his suicide note that he wrote, as he left his house to walk to this bridge to commit that act, he wrote, "If just one person smiles at me on the way, I won't do it."
Yeah. Wow.
And of course, he killed himself, and we found the note, so clearly nobody smiled at him on the way. But you turn on the television, And you see, Jersey Shore and Big Brother and all of these horrible television programs that model behavior that if you were to follow that behavior would lead to death. I mean, it truly is. The Bible talks about there's a road that leads to life and a road that leads to death. If you model the behavior that's being shown to you through our culture, it will lead to death. The death metal, the skulls, the leering demons and dragons and things that people put on their clothing and tattoo onto their flesh, all of that is a path that leads to death. That's what darkness. And it's being modeled for us everywhere we turn. Now they stay with you to watch over you and protect you spiritually. Amen. And the reason they do that, she was explaining to me, is because when you leave your body and you go out into wherever you go, your body is empty. And when you come back, you don't always come back alone. And that just sent chills down my spine because I thought about all these people who have reported to me this experience of voices. And so she said that the shamans protect you so that nothing can come back with you. Wow. But she said, we think you're all idiots to be sitting around smoking crack and smoking pot and doing whatever without any kind of spiritual protection, because of course you're going to come back, and in a certain percentage of the time you're not going to come back alone. So now let me fast forward to the hypnosis.
Well, that's pretty scary.
What I realized with hypnosis and meditation are both methods of removing yourself from the body. So they're quite similar to all those other things that I talked about, abuse or anesthesia or drug use or, I guess the occult is a little bit different. But they're all kind of ways of removing your essence out of your body, removing your soul and your spirit from your body. And I have come to conclude, just after talking to thousands of people, that it's probably maybe not the healthiest thing to do to engage in a practice that takes you away from your body. And it's interesting because that's what you were just saying, is, people aren't in their bodies because they're always off in some other place. And if you tie this all up with a nice bow and bring in the spiritual element, I actually believe that a lot of, you asked me earlier, what's the big picture? Like, who's behind this? And I actually think it's a spiritual battle. That there is a goal afoot on this planet to cause all human beings to be willing to leave their bodies in that way. And, you take a look at Twilight, Stephanie Meyer's film, or The Host, or a horrible recent film that is all about being possessed. I mean, actually being possessed by aliens or spirits, whatever you want to call them. Something comes in your body and becomes one with you. I always think this whole...
Yeah, meditation for me has always been the opposite. It's about coming back to your body, occupying your body, just being there and not, coming back to yourself and
But I think it's the emptying out is what I'm referring to. It's the emptying of yourself. This idea that I'm going to empty myself of all desires. I mean, that's the goal of Eastern mysticism and of Hindu and even Buddhism to some extent. Is a desire to no longer, or a goal to no longer have desires, or a goal to no longer have much of you left at all, to kind of minimize the self. And what's interesting is, as a Christian, that's also, interestingly enough, the goal of Christianity and of Christ as well, is to minimize the self and maximize the space for the Holy Spirit inside of yourself, so you're not so self-focused.
Right. When the 1% do that first, then then they can. Right. When the powers that be do that first, because that's what they want the people to do. But of course, they're doing the exact opposite, so they could take over you and what you don't.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Right. Now, and let me tie this back to Google and Motorola and Regina Dugan, which is what we began with. So when they hired Regina Dugan as their head of Motorola, they also hired at around the same time Ray Kurzweil as their head of engineering. And that was a shocking choice because Ray Kurzweil is sort of a prophet for this new concept that we don't need bodies anymore, that we can merge with our machines in what he refers to as the singularity, which is this idea that there will come a point when we will become one with the whole computer infrastructure and with this imaginary world that was created through these screens, that we will upload ourselves into that matrix, as it were, or into that computer framework, and we will no longer need these packages of meat known as bodies, so we can just leave these behind because they get old and they get sick. And you can have immortality if you just upload yourself into this virtual reality existence.
Yeah, that
And
sounds
it
pretty
sounds like
scary.
science fiction, and it sounds crazy, but this guy's hardcore. And one of the things that Google is now working on is brain implants. Actual ways to put the computer inside of you. If you haven't seen it yet, you can go on YouTube and see the Verizon ad when they strap the guy down and they put the computer into his DNA. It's the Verizon DNA ad. It's shocking. They're taken into this futuristic operating room and they strap him down and he's all happy about it. And they inject the computer into his very body. Right. And so this idea of the singularity where we merge with and become one with this technology, I think is really the end game.
Yeah,
I think that's where this is all going.
That sounds pretty scary, I would say. I mean, that's beyond any sci-fi movie I've ever seen in my life. I wanted to remind you, it's 11 minutes after the hour.
Yeah, I probably am. Yeah, I'm going to have to wrap it up, but this has really been quite a far-reaching and fascinating conversation. I appreciate your sharing your thoughts with me.
Yeah, thank you for all of your work. And, even though it is kind of a hard pill to swallow, if you swallow, just people need to just take it in a little bit at a time. And, just do it in parts that are not so overwhelming, but at least start to move in that direction. Don't turn away, because the more you turn away, the more, you're just making it easier for them to, keep doing what they're doing.
Exactly. No, and I think it's not only, there is a place for making others aware, but then there's a place of really working on yourself,
right?
And not in a self-centered, let me focus on me kind of way, but in a way that
in a healthy way
you to become, healthier and just a better person,
right?
And do the right thing.
Well, thank you so much, and we'll have you back again in the future. And how do people find you?
Well, I am one of the co-creators of StartPage.com, which is the world's most private search engine. We didn't get a chance to talk about StartPage, but if you're using these privacy-invading services, I encourage you to make the switch over to StartPage instead of Google or Bing or Yahoo.
Right.
Also, StartMail.com is the new private email service. It's a paid service that will be coming out next year. And people can sign up for an early access to an account at startmail.com and watch a video about it. It's fully encrypted, so it's NSA proof. Okay. And my personal website, I do a daily radio program from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern. And you can find that at kmashow.com. Those are my initials, or at KatherineAlbrecht.com.
Okay, well, thank you. And, hopefully we'll be able to at least put the brakes on the agenda of the elite.
Yep.
Okay, that was the end, winding down of our pre-recorded interview with Katherine Albrecht earlier today. And we're just going to take a quick break, and then we're going to get Dr. Bruce Levine, who was recently in the documentary State of Mind, The Psychology of Mind Control. Stay tuned. Okay, thank you, Paula. And we are back from break, and we have Dr. Bruce Levine that I was introduced to from recently watching the State of Mind documentary, The Psychology of Mind Control. And I thought I'm so glad that people are making documentaries about things like this. Psych was my major. I love psychology. I've studied it all my life on so many different levels, and trauma is one of my favorite subjects that I've studied. And I actually went to Boulder, Colorado to seek out a Dr. Peter Levine, who wrote a book that I read on healing trauma from the nervous system called Waking the Tiger. And, I was going to go to Naropa, the school there, but of course that didn't work out so well because I don't have a lot of money, but I'm pretty much self-taught. And so Dr. Bruce, I'm sure you've gotten a lot of calls since being on this documentary. How's everything been going since this documentary came out?
Well, yeah, I'm getting a lot of emails, calls. Lots of people, I think, get it that they're being controlled. I mean, I don't know how much you've talked about that particular documentary on your show yet.
I actually played segments of it not last week. A week or two ago, I played a good 10 or so minutes of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a real divide among what you would hear in the mainstream media and the sort of kind of elite people at the top of the hierarchy who it's in their interest to kind of want to kind of poo-poo and make fun of anybody who thinks that there's a lot of indoctrination, a lot of propaganda, a lot of attempts to kind of manipulate and control people. Immediately they're gonna make fun of anybody who talks about it, and no matter how much data and articles they are back, how many degrees and credentials, of which there are a lot of folks in that film had a lot. They're going to do that because it's in their interest. But the thing is that I think that a huge part of America, and this is, I talk to folks across the political spectrum. I talk to folks who would consider themselves more libertarian, which are a lot of those filmmakers who made that show, and then I've talked to folks who would consider themselves more sort of left, anti-authoritarian, people who would go to the Occupy movement, Occupy Wall Street. So, but across the political spectrum, there are a lot of people out there who are what I call anti-authoritarians, people who really don't take authority automatically seriously. I mean, they question authority.
My kind of people, anti-authoritarian. That's a really good way of. That's a good umbrella.
It is a good umbrella, and it's a very unifying umbrella because a lot of people who think they're very different politically, and again, the mainstream media wants to divide people, divide and conquer. That's what they've always done. And so a lot of people, nobody agrees on everything, so people are going to have different points of view on certain issues. But a lot of anti-authoritarians, question that whether the government is lying to them, whether the government actually cares about them, and they question a lot of the differences between a lot of left anti-authoritarians and sort of libertarians are really who's the senior partner in this government-corporate partnership. And so left anti-authoritarian or Occupy movement people will know that, will understand that it's the people who have the money are going to have the most power, the corporations, and some of these libertarians, they focus more on the government, and a lot of what I try to do is unify these people and say, hey, look, these guys are working together here to control you here, and what we've got to do here is together resist that on an individual level and on a group level. And I think, the good news is that there's a lot more anti-authoritarians out there in America than people feel. A lot of people get really depressed and they get real cynical and they think everybody's just a lemming going along with things. But I think what I found, and this is a lot of what my sort of, I guess, calling is to kind of bring attention to the fact that a lot of people are rebelling and resisting, but they don't know how to rebel and resist. So some people just who are really anti-authoritarians, they don't get political. They just rebel and resist by becoming alcohol abusers, and they get depressed. And so a lot of these people who are so-called mentally ill, I know a lot of these folks, and they're more natural anti-authoritarians, but nobody has ever validated their anti-authoritarian, their questioning of authority as being a healthy thing.
Exactly. That is so. I'm so glad that you're saying this because this is so. I am so happy that you're saying this stuff right now because. Again, I'm going to bring up my topic of fitness. I've always felt that fitness is such an important, obviously that is the whole point of life, is to be an individual, is to break away from authority and to then become your own authority. Like an airplane doesn't stay on the runway forever. It just uses the runway to get liftoff, and then it doesn't need the runway anymore. That is what our lives are supposed to be. We use, right, this term authority. I mean, real authority, real leadership elevates people. It doesn't oppress people. It teaches people.
And that's what anti-authoritarians do. They question the legitimacy of an authority. And if the authority knows what they're talking about, they don't lie, they actually care about people. And there are some authorities you run into in your life who do that. Hopefully, I mean, I've got a car mechanic who's an authority, and he's not somebody who I I take what he's saying seriously. So I don't challenge and resist every authority out there. But a real anti-authoritarian, once they assess some authority, doesn't know what they're talking about, or they lie, they don't really care about you, which are most politicians and a lot of other authorities out there in life, they challenge that authority, they resist that authority, and that's really what that's the quality of your life. And part of what I want to kind of bring the message out there is that of a lot of people who are just pacified and depressed, that there's a kind of a energy that you get from challenging illegitimate authorities and discovering your own truths.
And it definitely chemically changes you, and I think it does release endorphins. And I think it's what motivated me to also, aside from fitness and yoga, and I was a massage therapist, and it's that whole idea of when muscles are tight and constricted and you apply the right amount of pressure, it's that pressure that causes the muscles to release, and it actually feels good. It's the lack of pressure. It's the lack of having something to push up against. People need something healthy and someone healthy to push up against in order to, that's the reason why I was always drawn towards exercising, having, weight training and having something solid and concrete to push off of. When someone doesn't have a healthy authority person to resist and push off of, in a healthy way. And yes, it's the right thing to do to challenge an unhealthy authority, but then of course that person is just going to continue to try to keep you in and go in circles and never let you ever feel like you know what you're talking about.
Right. And that's, on a real basic core level, I mean, that's how, say, a pimp will control a prostitute. I mean, is that if that pimp tries to make that prostitute feel like they're nothing, right? That they have no self-respect. They purposely, treat them verbally and physically badly so that they're going to not feel like they've got enough energy and strength to kind of think for themselves and act on that. And in a lot of ways, that's what's happened to the whole American population out there. They've allowed themselves to just kind of get beat up so badly and accept these illegitimate authorities that even though they know a lot of things out there are going that they disagree with, like this, for example, this corporate control and these senseless wars that we go into one after another. They know it. They already know these things, but they can't do anything about it. They've been beaten. They've been broken. So that's a lot of also what I try to talk about. That is that there's a certain way that individuals can move out of any kind of abusive relationship, and there's certain ways that populations can move out of this abusive relationship. But they have to first admit it. They first have to kind of come to grips with the fact that, oh my God, this is what's happened to me here. I've become like sort of an abused victim here, and I've been broken. And if you stay in denial, then you don't have any chance at all.
Exactly. Dr. Bruce, so let me just ask you this one question. Would you say, because I believe exactly what you just said about abusive relationships and beating people down, that is the real debt in this world. And it's not a fake fiat currency economic debt that we've been made to believe that it is, that the real deficit is what you just described, is keeping a person oppressed, keeping someone in what I call emotional or psychological debt, where you never allow them to accrue any kind of self-confidence, any kind of self-worth, any kind of self-esteem, as long as from a certain age you can keep people in that low position of power. And anytime they try to find ground to stand on, anytime they try to feel good about themselves or acquire, even their rightful share of self-worth or self-esteem, as long as there's somebody there pulling the rug out from under them, you can keep someone indefinitely in debt.
Right, absolutely. And I think people have to understand that if you're addicted to power, and there's many people out there who are just become consummate control freaks. It doesn't take that much intelligence to realize that, well, the way to keep that power, keep that control, is to do exactly what you're talking about, is to make people feel like they're nothing, that they don't know they don't know anything, they don't know enough to challenge authority, and to kind of have people not have great self-esteem. And that's what goes on from day one in a lot of our schools. I mean, you see a lot of what goes on in our schools. I just saw a poll I was writing about, that when kids go to school, like 80% of them are really engaged. They're all excited about learning and new things, and then they realize that's not a lot of what goes on in school. That a lot of what goes on in schools are just kind of getting pushed around and made to be in places they don't want to be, and forced compliance. Not all the time. Sometimes they have a good teacher and it's fun, but not most of the time, especially when they get to high school. So by the time high school comes around, that the vast majority of kids are completely disengaged from schools. But they have to be there. It's sort of like they have to be there. They're terrorized that if they don't stay in this place that they hate, they're disengaged from, they're not learning anything, they're not going to get any jobs, they're not going to go to college, their life is going to be ruined, they're going to be flipping hamburgers for the rest of their life. So that's at an early age. That process is a lot of schooling. Again, not all of it. Sometimes people actually learn something useful in school and they got a good teacher, but for the most part, a lot of what happens from the get-go is people are broken through the whole school system. And in my profession, the mental health profession, the people who are still struggling and fighting and resisting, they come in there and they break a whole bunch of other people by giving them these pseudo-scientific diagnoses and making them feel like they have some kind of defect because they're depressed, or defect because they're not paying attention to boring things or whatever. And then the next thing they do is, nowadays almost everybody's drugged, everybody's medicated. And that's another way that any kind of totalitarian society wants to break a population, is you just drug them, keep them disconnected from really what they're feeling, what their gut's telling them.
Right. And for so long I have been trying to go in the other direction of reconnecting to the body, and that it's the fact that this, the system does try to keep people disconnected from what they feel, or invalidating, like you mentioned before, people that did challenge authority and they were not validated in challenging the authority. And so, then they end up just getting depressed and drinking and being on drugs. And it really is turning that around. And I'm sorry, I'm just trying to remember and go back to what you also said before, that it just like keeps people disconnected. Oh yeah, and you said you have to admit things in order, obviously, in order to change it, and that is the way to break the vicious cycle.
Right, you have to come out of denial and not have shame. I mean, it's humiliating for a lot of people out there on an individual level to say, hey, their wife or their husband has just been controlling them, and they've reduced them to nothing, and to say that about your whole government and to say that about your whole society. That's a rough thing, and it brings a lot of shame for a lot of people. And so one of the first paths out is people have to heal, and they have to say, hey, liars are pretty good at lying, and it doesn't take that much intelligence. If you devote your whole life to just being a good liar, you're going to be able to run a good number on people who are innocent out there, who are buying into it. So important thing is to forgive yourself, and also to forgive other people out there, instead of looking down upon them as being idiots or lemmings, to kind of have some compassion. Boy, it could happen to any one of us human beings, that we could fall prey to somebody who's a total control freak liar, and it's a slippery slope, and it doesn't take that long for you to kind of completely lose self-respect and self-esteem.
I wanted to ask you a question, because recently, not somewhat recently, but also actually it's been a while ago that I've really come to conclude that we live in a kind of a homophobic society where we, crony capitalism, whatever you want to call it, it's so overly masculinized, like, the masculine on steroids, that any trace of even healthy and normal balance, caring, compassion, humanity is looked at like weak, like you're I don't want to use any questionable terminology.
I know what you're thinking there. I know what you're saying. I come from Rockaway there. I know what you. I know the word that's going on in your head right now, and you're right. I know. It's exactly what goes on out there. That increasingly, and this really started to happen big time in the 1980s, when you had this kind of idea that selfishness was what everybody was just selfish and out for themselves, and there was nothing wrong with that. That there was developed a bizarre kind of morality around just everybody out for themselves, and that anybody who actually had some compassion and was caring about somebody, they were lying, they were dishonest, they were being fake. So yeah, you've got again a bizarre shaming of another aspect of our humanity. I mean, one way is that authority can control historically, whether political, religious authorities. If they could shame aspects of your humanity, then they got control over you. So many years they would shame people's sexuality. They would shame that as being immoral, or even heterosexuality. Too much of that they would shame, but certainly homosexuality. And now if they can shame, they shame rebellion. So they put all these kids, who are rebelling at all, they shame them with mental illness. They shame folks, what you're talking about, who really are not these super aggressive people who are like not these super competitive, aggressive people who want to, make $1 million before they're 25 years old or something like that. That they're shamed. So if you could do that, if you could take different aspects of people's humanity and shame them, pathologize them, make them feel bad about themselves for having it, you're going to have control over them.
Can I have you ever heard of John Bradshaw?
Yes.
He was one of my favorite people in the 90s. I mean, I was in love with him in the 90s and read just about all of his books and his on the public channel. He used to, that whole dynamic with the mobile and the family system. I thought that guy was, I had so much sense of that stuff. And then when I watched him and read his work, it just confirmed things for me. And his one book in particular, because you were talking a lot about shame, was called Healing the Shame That Binds You. And it's like you have to be such a brave, courageous person to read and confront the things that he writes about in this book. Because, talk about admitting things to yourself.
Right. It's sort of very sad what's happening in the whole mental health profession and the whole substance abuse world. Was that at one time, a few years back, you had more people like him talking about the real reasons why people moved into self-destructive behaviors, and people talked a lot more about shame being a huge thing. People talked about what went on in families and abuse and trauma, and then all of a sudden what happened was and especially started in the mid-1980s, the psychiatry just sort of allowed themselves to be corrupted and then completely taken over by drug companies. And so it was in their interest to get everybody to stop thinking about all of these real things and think about all of our problems with these biochemical brain imbalances, which, by the way, they made up. And they eventually kind of have thrown out. So all these things about biochemical brain imbalances, not having enough serotonin, that's why you're depressed, and all these kind of things, that all your alcohol abuse was all genetic. And so they want to make everything biochemical and genetic. That's the way that they can make tons and tons of money selling drugs, which is what they've done. And so people have lost their humanity in understanding these important things that Bradshaw talked about. A lot of other people talked about how important shame is, abuse, trauma. These are the reasons why people really get depressed and have serious kind of problems.
Right. I used to also Melody Beattie was another one I used to read a lot.
Sure, Codependent No More, right?
Yeah, I've been reading, like, there's so many books. There's almost like a book I haven't read on self-help, dysfunctional family, or healing, and another Barbara DeAngelis and John Gray I used to read also. I used to really like Barbara DeAngelis because they were always talking about, the family system and just how to relate. She actually had it was on a VHS tape. That's how old it was. It was like 1994. I think I had this, it was called the Making Love Work program. Mm-hmm. And it was like $100. I thought it was like so expensive. And it had a workbook and all these cassette tapes and VHS tapes. and she would sit couples down that were having issues and have them do mirroring techniques and like saying back to the person what you heard and things like that. And I was to me it was like Christmas. I was like, oh my God, this is like the greatest thing in the world, because I came from total divorce and domestic violence when I was growing up. I was like on my own, like when I was 6 years old, and all I ever wanted in the world was good, healthy, loving family, and I'm over here doing all this stuff and reading and and really believing that if I did these exercises that and worked out and did my yoga and my meditation and did my conscious visualization stuff, that I actually could heal, but it's like the world has gotten worse.
Right.
Not
right.
better.
We've gone into deeper denial. I know I've mostly been embarrassed by being a professional. When I went into the whole psychology profession when I was an undergraduate in the late 1970s, there were some cool things about it. There were people exactly like you're talking. People talked about, interpersonal kinds of therapies, about how people's problems had to do a lot with what were relationships. People talked about a lot of real important things, family, politics, and then what happened, people started taking seriously a lot of the kind of pseudoscience that people used to laugh about, these silly diagnoses and these everybody being on drugs. Became no big deal to just put anybody, if they were just depressed for a really good reason, just stick them on some drugs. And so the whole profession became a complete embarrassment for me. And so that's really, I kind of hid out for a bunch of years. I was so embarrassed to be a psychologist, and then I started to write about it in the mid-1990s. And now a lot of the stuff that I started writing about then it's starting to make, people are starting to get it. So even a lot of more mainstream psychiatrists are laughing at the latest DSM, which for people in your audience who've never heard of, this is the Diagnostic Bible of Psychiatry, and each one gets bigger and bigger. They're up to the DSM-5, and it's a total joke. It has nothing to do with science. It's just a bunch of guys in a committee. They decide what they don't like, and they figure, if they could get other people not to like these things too, it's a mental illness. That's why homosexuality was a mental illness in the first DSM, and the second DSM it was, and then in the 70s, gay activists after Stonewall scared the hell out of the American Psychiatric Association, so they got scared and they pulled it out. And that's really the science of how mental illnesses come in and go out of existence. And so a lot of people knew that back in the 70s. So you had movies like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in 1975, 76. A lot of people got how this thing was really a illegitimate authority that was doing a lot of damage out there. But people got lost. A lot of things happened in the 80s and 90s that people really got lost in a major way. I guess the whole psychiatry is just one piece of that.
Can I ask you about 12-step programs? Because in my opinion, the powers that be need one really, really bad, and they need an intervention. The people need to intervene, and the powers that be truly need a 12-step program to break their addiction to power and all this fake money.
Yeah.
The
interesting thing for 12-step is it's a really, in a lot of ways, a really kind of radical idea of people helping themselves. That's where it started, and that's what was the power of it. There was a lot of powerful ideas that started with 12-step, was that people can actually help one another. People who have the same problem, who've overcome it, can help one another. That's a powerfully radical sort of anti-authoritarian idea, that you don't need experts, that people can help themselves. And the other part that's really powerful is that it's non-coercive. It's not forced. It's like you don't want people who are going and who are made to be there. And really, the problematic thing that happened even with 12-step. It's not the fault of 12-step. It's how they got annexed by these big hospitals. Because they realized it was so powerful. So then every center, every Betty Ford, all these places that people were paying $20,000-$30,000, either forced treatment or paying a ton of money, they all incorporated 12-step, and before you knew it, it was like, well, there was some doctor telling them that they needed to be there. It was coercive. It was like, and so all the power of peer support, and all of that kind of anti-authoritarian energy of it being non-coercive, it's disappeared some, and that's really sad, because in a lot of ways, almost everything out there, the best cures, including people I know who had been psychiatrically hospitalized for schizophrenia. That a lot of the best treatments for it are all having to do with peer support. And I know a lot of people in that whole world, they call themselves psychiatric survivors, who were once diagnosed with schizophrenia or bipolar. And, the mainstream world thinks, oh, my God, you're going to be ill for life and you have to be on drugs for life. Well, there's a lot of peer support in that world that they've helped one another. So it's 12-step, the whole idea of it is sort of sad that it didn't spread, that whole kind of anti-authoritarian peer support thing, to a lot of parts of life. But like these guys realize, well, we're going to incorporate it and make money off of it in our big expensive hospitalizations.
I think, that is just, I'm hearing you speak, and I can't think of just a more horrible betrayal of one fellow human being to another, but other than to betray a trust of a patient that's coming to someone for help, and all they can think about is, they want to make money and take advantage and exploit this person. I mean, nothing could, it's just, right. So that psychiatrist is really the sick one. I mean, why don't they just say no? Like, why don't these doctors just say no to these pharmaceutical people? I mean,
well, they're not better. I think that's one thing I got. I didn't get much in terms of helping people in all my years of schooling, but one thing I got was hanging around a lot of people who were psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, and I can tell you, this should be no surprise to anyone out there, that they're no more healthy and just as screwed up, just as moral and immoral as everybody else out there. And so you ask yourself, how many people in general out there in society, if they have a chance to turn somebody, to make money off of a person for life, and rather than just saying, hey, you've got some episodic problem here and that, you're not going to be mentally ill forever here, we can do some things about it, as opposed to like, well, you've got this illness, you've got this disease, and you've got a customer for life. It's a bad incentive, and people out there who want to apply the market economy and capitalism to every aspect of their life, from private prisons to mental health, I mean, they don't know. They haven't. You better work in it before you start doing that, because you don't want to apply capitalism to everything. You don't want to apply it to mental health because there's just too much money to be made in keeping people really messed up and actually making them even worse. And that's what to a lot of kids out there. A kid out there just having a little hard time with school. They get diagnosed with ADHD. They get put on Ritalin, amphetamines like Adderall and all that. Because 60% of them become bipolar. And kids who are really messed up, and you got really put them on. The next thing they know, they're on disability. Their parents are getting money for that. It just goes on and on. So it's really, people really need to understand that there's just tons and tons of money to be made by these big pharmaceutical companies of keeping people ill, and every 4 times as much money just writing prescriptions out to people than they do talking to folks. And we had a New York Times article a couple of years ago that talked about the fact that only 11% of psychiatrists are talking to all their people now. It's less now. I mean, this is 6 or 7 years ago, because you've got to be almost totally unique out there as a psychiatrist. Say, like, I don't care if I'm going to be making 4 or 5 times less money than my colleagues out there. I'm going to do the right thing. Well, most of them are not going to be like that.
I wanted to bring up, a little bit the 12-step program and the power that people do not need to go to, like a professional to get help, and that it actually, that is what my belief is that you have a better chance of healing and getting help from, because first of all, it's supposed to come from the family system. I mean, your parent isn't a psychiatrist when they're raising you. They're, at least back in the olden days, when the family system was a little bit healthier and more intact than it is today, your parent doesn't have to be a psychiatrist to be a parent. They just have to be someone who's there, someone who listens, someone who's caring, and someone who is not out at work 40 plus hours a week. And it reminds me of, I believe it was in Confessions of an Economic Hitman, where John Perkins was talking about these Amazonian people that he got to know, and how the whole community would come around one person who got sick, whether physical or mental or whatever it was, and the whole community would come to the person, to help that person, bring the spirit, their spirit back to them, so that they would heal. Right. And I think about that all the time, and I think that is part of the problem. Is our separation from nature, and that people don't know their own power. The average human being, right, doesn't know their own power, that we, as just, human beings that are created, we have this power to help one another heal. I know that. And if we could just come together and just listen to someone. I used to work upstate in Rhinebeck, New York, at the Omega Institute for Holistic Studies. I don't know if you ever heard of it. I was up there from 2001 until 2004, where I met John Perkins and Deepak Chopra and all these people, and Eckhart Tolle, giving all their workshops and stuff. So I'm giving a shout out to the Omega Institute, and I do believe that it was a really great place, but I am going to admit that there definitely were turning a bit corporate after a while, and kind of, it was almost like a corporate spirituality. But anyway, that idea of people for free, because when you were also just talking about how all of this stuff and profitizing psychiatry, and you're making it the opposite of what it's supposed to be. So, right, anything that capitalism gets its hands on, it ends up just destroying.
Well, certainly a lot of the things that, one of the reasons that they've just kind of stopped talking about, probably one of the most important things that goes on among human beings, which is healing, how people self-heal, how people heal one another, is that really, that has nothing to do with money. It has nothing to do with capitalism. I mean, in fact, all that stuff gets in the way. It's very hard to have a paid relationship that's a healing relationship. There's certain things that you can do with people. I'm not saying that there aren't certain things that can happen, that people can be teaching things that can happen that are useful in couples and individual growth. But when people are really damaged and traumatized and abused, healing is an important thing, and that's one of the really sort of, again, scary things about the modern sort of psychiatric pharmaceutical industrial complexes. They've just completely taken that out of people's consciousness. I mean, it's sort of an Orwellian kind of a masterpiece here, that's such a huge aspect of our humanity, so critical to how people become more whole after they've been broken. It's healing, and there's a lot of different ways to heal, and that's a whole big, fascinating world of how it could go down in the 12-step meeting, how it could go down in certain relationships, how it could go down in people's art and their music and writing. There's a lot of ways that people can heal, and they've just kind of taken that off the table, and a lot of people don't even know about this.
Let me ask you then, if you could answer the question, then how could people learn to help someone to heal from trauma, say like post-traumatic stress?
Well, I think a lot of it is the first step is just really having a deep kind of understanding and empathy. So, again, back to the idea of peer support, it's going to be a lot more likely that somebody who's been really beat up pretty bad and abused and broken, who's a veteran, for example, in one of these kind of senseless wars we've been in the last bunch of years here, is that if for them to help one another, because they're going to know more than anybody else what that particular kind of brokenness comes from, having to wherever they feel themselves traumatized, and they're going to have they're going to get to that place faster. I haven't been in Afghanistan or Iraq and fighting there, and so I can have almost more like an intellectual understanding. Whereas, like for me, when I've been with people who've been through graduate school or professional training or all other kinds of things that are also kind of abusive, traumatizing things that I've experienced myself, I can more easily, quickly kind of understand what's happening to them, be more sensitive to where they're at, more sensitive to where you're saying something that's going to be actually helpful, not shaming, positively confrontational without doing damage. And so it's it's just a very kind of intuitive gut thing of how some people help and heal one another. But a lot of it has to do with, really comes down to do with love, which is a very difficult thing to explain. Again, another word that's gotten out of our whole profession. It's psychiatrists, psychologists don't talk about this, but that's a way that people heal. It's through a loving relationship. It's where people are feeling totally accepted, people being around folks who aren't frightened by them, who aren't needing to control them, who are willing to kind of understand them and be with them.
It's all about giving, because again, so sometimes I use the metaphor of deficit, and so post-traumatic stress would be like a huge deficit to someone's nervous system. And so, obviously to heal from post-traumatic stress is to get someone out of a huge psychological deficit. And naturally, the only way to do that is to have people that really do have a lot to give. And I think of the word anchor, like John Bradshaw always used to talk about creating an anchor. And that's what I feel like these people need. Like, they need people to be an anchor and to just be there while they move through these such horrible feelings. Because just like the economy, the thing that perpetuates debt in this world is the fact that people do not admit, like you said before, and they keep perpetuating the debt. So obviously the way out of debt is to acknowledge it and then start dealing with it and moving through it. Again, John Bradshaw always said the only way out is through.
I think what happens to a lot of folks who've been traumatized, and we've all been to a greater or in a lesser degree, is that part of what happens is that we become scared about a lot of things that are going on inside of us, and we become scary. And there's a lot of ways we can become scary. We can become scary by being very angry and being depressed and just being unfun to be around, being volatile, to being controlling. And so a lot of the vicious cycle is we've been traumatized, we're uncomfortable with what's going on inside of us, it makes us uncomfortable to be with, and people either back off, they don't want to be around us at all, or they're controlling. And that's what a lot of mental health professionals are. They're very, very controlling, and they're incongruently controlling. In other words, they're phony about how controlling they are. They're controlling this is one of like labeling and diagnosing and trying to manipulate, modify, medicating, all that kind of stuff is very controlling, and that's the worst thing. That's the opposite of healing, being controlling. And so that's the great healers out there. And I've met a handful of people in my life that I consider really great healers. Is that they're very much unfrightened by the way people are behaving. They're not taking their behaviors seriously, as opposed to most mental health professionals. That's all they're taking seriously. That's all they focus in on, their symptoms. And they're really great healers. They don't take those things that seriously. They see through those symptoms. They see through to the person's core of who they are, and they are not afraid of that. And that's a healing kind of experience.
That's like, just hearing you say that is just, it sounds so wonderful. And if people, because what I notice a lot about people when they don't know how to communicate. It's like, right, like when people communicate, they communicate in a vicious circular kind of a way rather than a breaking the cycle and then let's move in a better direction kind of a way. Like people will express themselves in a certain way, which then triggers the other person, and then that person's triggered, and then they trigger the other person back, and then all you have back and forth is just people triggering one another.
Right. You have no humanity, no love, just reaction and triggers and just a nightmare. Right, and that's a lot of life out there, and that's certainly a lot of what goes on between people internally and interpersonally and within nations, and it's just a disaster. And that's what what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is this is the wisdom of the ages, from that goes way back to the Buddha, to a lot of other folks. They came to these same conclusions, that a lot of it is not moving under anxiety, under fear, being in touch with when you're frightened, and not moving into kind of controlling behavior with yourself and with other people around that. And unfortunately, we've gone the complete opposite. That's one way. There's a lot of different ways to talk about how insane American society has become, starting in maybe the mid-1980s. But that's one way, one prism to look at it, is we've become more disconnected from how frightened we are of ourselves and one another, and we've become more controlling. And we've now legitimized being this way of being as being okay, as opposed to for all their problems, in other eras in American society, especially 60s and 70s, is that they recognize this was problematic. Now, their solutions obviously didn't work, and there was a lot of self-absorption, a lot of things that people got lost on. But it was much more apparent then that this was problematic, and we have to kind of do something about it. And what's happened here is this kind of very kind of cynical denial of the modern era is that people are just thinking, well, we can just kind of deny how scared we are, and we can just all move into controlling ourselves and controlling other people, and that's going to be okay. Well, it's just not work. It's just not work. We've got 400% increase in antidepressants in the last 10, 15 years. We've got 25% of women between 40 and 60 on antidepressants. It just goes on and on and on. We've got antipsychotics, which back in my, 30 years ago, nobody was using antipsychotics. You had to be in a mental hospital to use those kinds of things. It's like nowadays it's one of the biggest $18 billion a year drug industry out there. They give out that stuff to candy, to kids, to old people, to everything. So we've just become completely insane out there, and part of the reason is exactly what we've been talking about here. People are just not dealing with how afraid they are of what's going on inside of them, and they just become control freaks with themselves and each other. And there is basically a loveless society.
I feel, due to our complete disconnection from the environment and the natural world, like people have just become completely disoriented. And I mean, I was an EMT for the fire department in New York for about 6 or 7 years, and I saw that it was pretty much just about the paycheck, and people would just come to work and get their paycheck and leave. And I was just this crazy person that actually cared and was there to make a difference. And so that job wasn't going to last very long for me. But being that we're so disconnected from the natural world, I think about, say, like hypothermia, for instance, and as a person, or shock, like when someone goes into like a hypovolemic shock, and the first thing that goes is their mental status, and they get into altered mental status as the body goes further and further into debt. And then, using hypothermia, as a person's mental status deteriorates, they make more poor choices in order to try to get out of or save themselves. And so, it just becomes like a vicious cycle.
Right.
And then if you're turning to people for help who are looking at you with dollar signs in their eyes, I mean, it really, I mean, it's like unbelievably terrifying. This is just like so terrifying that people will exploit someone that's coming to them for help. I mean, oh my God, that is just so horrible.
Well, a lot of the times what's going on is it's not conscious. It's not like people are I think there's only a small minority of psychiatrists, doctors who actually are sociopaths. They're consciously going like, how am I going to exploit somebody? I mean, that's what's going on mostly is people think that they help. They're helping. people. Yeah,
Really?
they really believe that they are, and a lot of what they're helped though is oppressive, and that's a lot about American foreign policy. I mean, there's a lot of folks out there who are clearly sociopaths, who are really just going in there and trying to exploit other societies and nations around the world. But there's a lot of other people out there who really feel like, well, they really are trying to help in these other places around the world as they destroy them. But so that's a lot. I would think more the greater percentage of people out there, they're just kind of disconnected from what's actually helping people, and they want to believe that they are, but they really are doing people a lot more damage. So, for example, it's an obvious thing. You and I were talking here. A very common sense thing here is if you're only focusing on what's wrong about people, and you're focusing in on their symptoms, which they're already worried about, you're going to make them worse. That seems obvious, right, to you and I. But that would be radical or profound or crazy to most psychiatrists out there. For them, that's your job. You're supposed to be focusing in on what's wrong with them, and that's all and for them, that's all they do. And for them, the idea that could actually make people worse, as opposed to kind of not taking their symptoms so seriously and seeing what's neat about who they are, that feels like crazy. That feels radical to them.
Just coming back to nature, seems like kind of a simple thing, because I even hear that regular medical doctors are also taught the same thing. Like they're taught to just prescribe medication and not, do anything natural.
Right. That's nowadays, most of the psychiatric medication in America is prescribed by far by regular medical doctors, not by psychiatrists, because there's just not that many psychiatrists out there. There's 40,000 or something like that psychiatrists. There's like over 500,000 docs, and that's what mostly they're doing with the pediatricians or family care. People come in there and they're unhappy because most of America is unhappy, and boom, they get. It's easy to score antidepressants. It's about the easiest drug in America to score.
And these antidepressants, I mean, they're obviously not the answer.
Well, the studies show they haven't really worked. I mean, you're going to find in your audience out there 25-30% of the people out there, they go, oh, this saved my life. But in the way this, if you look at real science, that's about as good as placebo, especially if you do the science right. So that's really the way anything, they work no better or no worse than any kind of sugar pill placebo or any kind of thing out there. If you believe in them strong enoughly, it's going to help a lot of people. But in terms of straight science, they've been really a kind of joke. They've been snake oil.
We're coming, looks like we have just about 2 minutes left. Where can people find you, and where can they see the State of Mind documentary, The Psychology of Mind Control?
They can probably, they can find me if they go to brucelevine.net. That's BRUCELEVINE.net, and that's my website. And there's a whole bunch of free stuff there. Lots of free articles there, and I've got some media clips there. So there's a bunch of that. In terms of that documentary, I think their best bet is to just kind of Google that. I think that you could probably, if you Google that title, you can probably catch some YouTube, maybe even the entire movie of that on YouTube.
Right.
And so that would be what I'd recommend for folks.
Well, yeah, thank you for being on. The hour goes by so quickly. I think, we even kind of started a little bit after 7, but it would be great if you can come on again, because this was lots of fun. I do lots and lots of interviews, and this is really a fun one for me because I talk about a lot of things here that I don't usually talk about. So you did a great job from my point of view. Thank you so much, Dr. Bruce, and I'll be in touch with you again and have you back on again.
Sounds good. Bye-bye.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You're listening to Awake Radio. Straight talk for the awake and aware.